Well, welcome to Podcast Tips. My name is Rob Greenlee, and thank you for joining me in episode 18 of this live show and podcast. So, thank you for joining me today or tonight, wherever you happen to be. I appreciate you being here. It's always awesome. I've been doing this long enough to start to feel a little bit comfortable doing this show and bringing you in and getting you connected and answering your questions. And that's going to be a big part of the show tonight, is to get your feedback and your comments, and also join me in talking about a fascinating topic in the podcasting space right now, which is around audio and video podcasting to build community. So, and I think we've talked a little bit about this topic on the show in the past to some degree, but I wanted to deep dive again with a terrific guest that I brought on the show. His name is Seth Resler, and he's the founder of a company called Community Marketing Revolution, and he's gonna help us do a deep dive tonight on this hot topic of building community with your podcast, and really in the broader sense, not just your podcast, but around your personal brand, or if you have a particular company that you would like to build a closer relationship with. I think there's a lot of kind of pieces to this puzzle. So stay with us here. And also I wanted to mention too that we do have a giveaway that I'm going to be doing at the end of the show again, which is kind of a common thing that I do in the show. And we're going to be giving away a StreamYard Puddles Duck, as well as a StreamYard mug. So use the hashtag #TheYard in the comment field, and I will pull up. I think some folks have already started to do this already because they've been conditioned, because they've done this show with me in the past. I don't know if I have an example of it yet. Let's see, let's come in. Yeah, here it is. So you can see here just the hashtag #TheYard in your comment field of your preferred viewing platform here. So, and that'll automatically get you entered into the giveaway at the end of the show. And because StreamYard has a giveaway tool, it's at StreamYard.com/giveaway. And you can use it too if you happen to be a StreamYard user. And it's available to you if you want to use it for really kind of any kind of giveaway to kind of keep people watching as well. This is a strong kind of community building tool as well. So I will put this down right now. Let me bring Seth up to the screen here, and we can start this conversation and learn a little bit more about Seth as well. So here's Seth. Let's add you to the stage here and get you going. So Seth, it's great to have you with me.
Hey man, how are you? Good to see you, Rob.
I'm doing terrific here, and it's great to have you with me. I know we've done many podcasts together over the years, and so I do consider you to be a friend, and that's part of the brand of this show is Rob Greenlee and his friends of sorts. Nice. So trying to build really, this show is an example of what I'm trying to do, which is build community as well. And this show has a regular base of viewers that come in and check out the show, and I 100% appreciate all of that. But Seth, you've been thinking about the power of community for a very long time. This company, Community Marketing Revolution, is not something that's new for you. This is kind of something that you've seen an opportunity in the market, right? And jumping into full feet. Yeah.
This is the genesis of this. It's been a long time coming. It's something that's been sort of percolating in my brain for a long time, and a combination of things. I think the pandemic, when all of a sudden none of us could go out and could talk to other people, and we all felt that. And I think we all started to realize that content is great, but content is not the same thing as being around other people. And so I started to wonder, what was this all about, this community? And I started playing with different tools and different things, and really sort of figuring it out and exploring this topic. And it turns out I'm not the only one, not the first one. There's a lot of folks that are doing it. A lot of them are in Silicon Valley and are working with software as a service company. And so I started looking at what they were doing and trying to figure out how that could be applied outside that space, how it could be used for arts and entertainment brands, and frankly for content creators, because that's what I've been doing my whole life. I've been a content creator first in radio and then in podcasting, and wondering what does it mean to build a community around that.
Yeah. So as you think about your work in the podcasting space, now granted you have a long history with radio as well, and it is true that radio has been pretty focused on local communities for a long time. So this isn't really a stretch for you to think that building community is an important thing, because it really does come out of radio, this concept of connecting with the community. Is that a good assessment of it? And that's
Yeah,
where it
yeah,
came from?
yeah, sort of. I mean, certainly it was the parts that I liked about
Hmm.
community.
Hmm.
But let me take a moment and actually define what we mean by community, because I feel like that's a word that gets thrown around
Yeah,
a
it does.
lot. It's a word
Yeah,
that gets thrown around in the broadcasting space a lot as well, and
yeah,
isn't always used correctly.
yeah.
Often in radio, when they say community, what they really mean is local. Oh, we have a local DJ, or we cover
Correct.
local news stories, so
Right,
we're
you're
in
going down
touch
the
with the
street to
community.
do a live remote from a grocery store or something like that, right?
Right.
Yeah,
So
that's
we're
community.
in the community, and that's
Yeah.
not really what community is. Here's how I describe it: that we're all used to content creation, and this idea of you create content and you attract an audience, and then you monetize that audience through ads or through whatever other means you have. But when you do that, you can talk to the audience members as the content creator. They can sort of kind of talk back to you a little bit. They can send you a DM or an email or whatever, but not really. And the audience members don't talk to each other, right? I mean, you may watch House of Dragon and I watch House of Dragon. That doesn't mean that we are in a community together, because we aren't connected to each other just because
Hmm.
we both watch House of Dragon.
Yeah.
Um, with community, what you're really doing is you're getting a shared group, a group of people with a shared mission, a shared purpose, and you're creating a space for them. And you're allowing those people to come into that space where not only they can talk to you and you can talk to them, but more importantly, they can talk to each other. And I think one of the examples that really inspired me in all this was watching our friends Dan and Jared and what they've done with Podcast Movement, where they
Right.
have brought together a group of people who are all podcasters, all trying to become better podcasters, and they created a space for those folks to gather.
Hmm.
Because I remember the first time, I mean, this was, I don't know, 12, 13, 14 years ago, when I was just starting to podcast and I felt like I was the only one and didn't know anything. And I remember the first time I had conversations with folks like you, and went, oh, there's other guys out there who are trying to do the same things that I'm
Yeah.
trying to do. And I, it was great. It was like a breath of fresh air to know that. And so that's what it's really about: is how do we build a space, allow people to come into that space and connect with each other. And that means that a community and an audience are really not the same thing. Content plays a role in building community, but it doesn't play the full central role that it plays in building an audience. It's just part of the equation, and you can't build a community with content alone, because you can't create a space with content alone.
Right. So let's dig into that a little bit around audience doesn't equate to community. So audience is kind of like a singular experience, right? That doesn't have any connection with what they're consuming. So when you say it's different, isn't it kind of like another layer of engagement? Really, is what we're talking about, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think what it is it's sort of lateral engagement instead of just top down engagement, if you will. That
Right.
the audience members are talking to each other. Now, there are communities that are built around content, and there are content creators that have been able to build community around what they do. So that is possible.
Hmm.
But for the most part, what you really need there is a group of people who they have a shared mission. They have an interest in all trying to accomplish the same thing for themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And I 100% agree. I know I used to do live radio when I started many years ago, and that whole kind of interaction between people that are connected to the community
Mhm.
is really actually in a lot of ways a whole nother level of importance. Because once you started to inspire that connection between audience members, then you've kind of taken your community to a whole nother level, right? So how do you inspire those connections between, current audience members and building connections to create more of a community experience? Uh,
Yeah.
I mean, what can you do? Is it more of getting people to talk about each other? Is it creating environments where they can discover each other, or does it kind of happen organically because there is a piece of content or a creator that both people align with and there's a common passion? I know it's
I mean, it can happen organically, but I think as a content creator, you probably want to work to help that along. I
right.
mean, I think about back in the days, like, once upon a time, I was a big fan of the show Lost. And you remember that Lost fans, found ways to connect with each other. They found these spaces where they could get together and they could trade these conspiracy theories
Yeah.
about, what the smoke monster and all this different stuff in Lost meant. So sometimes it happens, and that was strictly organic, right? But I think what you're trying to do is you're trying to create a space. And that space can take any number of different forms. It can be physical, it can be digital. I think it can be a combination of the two. So a space might be something like the podcast movement conference, and that's a space that moves from time to time. It's not like they
Mhm.
erected a building, they do this conference. But you can also do an online group, like a Facebook group or a LinkedIn group or, a Discord server or a Slack channel or some proprietary version of that.
Mhm.
And then you can also do virtual events where people can come together and talk. Um,
Yeah.
one of the things that where my thinking has really evolved is in the space of events coming from radio. I was a content creator, and the idea was, we take My Chemical Romance, we play them on the radio, we attract an audience, and then we monetize that audience through ads. And
Mhm.
part of my job was to book concerts, to produce these concerts that we would do for the radio station. And I always thought of it the same way. We take My Chemical Romance, we put them on the stage, and we attract an audience, and then we monetize that audience through sponsorship or whatever it is. Now
Mhm.
I'm increasingly thinking of those events not in terms of content but in terms of creating spaces and allowing people to come together. And again, I hate to keep going back to podcast movement, but they're a great example of this, where they did things like, sometimes it's as simple as laying out tables and chairs and places where people can talk to each other, but sometimes it's more formal, like they did the brain dates there last year, where people could
Mhm.
come together and have a moderated discussion, and I
Yeah, I
led a
did that.
discussion
Yeah.
there.
Mhm.
Yeah, and it was great because you got to connect with people who were thinking about the same things that you were.
Yeah.
So I think that's really the key, is understanding the mission that your community members have. And one of the things that's really important here is that the mission has to be shared by everybody in the community, not just the people organizing the community.
Mhm.
uh, you know, Coming back to podcast movement, the mission of that community is not to sell tickets to the conference, right? That may be Dan and Jared's, one of the things that they're trying to do, but you and I don't, at the end of the day, really care how many tickets they sell. We're all trying to become better podcasters, trying to connect with other people so that we can all become better podcasters. That's the shared mission. The fact that it happens to sell tickets to the event is just an added bonus for the organizers. So first, I think you have to figure out what that mission is. What is everybody in the community trying to
Mhm.
do?
Mhm.
And then figure out, how do we create a space to allow them to come together and do that?
Yeah, and I know that mainly what we've been talking about is kinda like, in real life type of interactions here. Is there ways that like a program like this is a terrific, potential example, right, of what a show itself can do to trigger those kinds of interactions or those kinds of connections, even though they're not in physical presence of each other, the community. Now, granted, I've heard for years that it's always a good idea that to get out and take your show out to the real world more. Like I've done a lot of on stage live recordings of some of the podcasts that I've done at events where you have that kind of direct audience engagement, and it's always really exciting to do that kind of stuff. But a lot of people don't really have the kind of connections or the ability to get their show into a real world venue, right? A physical, let's
Yeah.
say a bar or a conference or something like that can get in front of real people when they're doing their show, right? Um, so how can a show format itself, do you think, to create those deeper interactive connections? Is it really a lot about creating emotional reactions? Is it about the personality of the host? Is it friend building? These are very
Yeah,
psychological things, right? That we're
yeah.
talking about,
So the term that I learned not too long ago that I love is
right?
engineering serendipity.
Right.
And what serendipity is that moment where two people come together, they meet at some sort of event, function, whether it's in person or
Yeah.
online, and something great comes out of it that's unexpected and fortuitous. I had a podcast called The Debrief. It was about the Detroit arts and entertainment scene. We did it for years, and then there was a global pandemic. You might have read about it.
Mhm.
And there was no Detroit arts and entertainment. Like our
Right.
show was basically what to go out and do this weekend, and all of a sudden it was like, well, these guys have curbside
Nothing.
pickup, right? so, so what we did is we started using a platform. We used a platform called Remo, which was to host virtual events, and we started bringing together Detroit artists and entertainers in these virtual events. And I'll never forget the moment that I sort of figured out the power of community was a guy walks into this virtual event and I say, well, what do you do? And he says, I fix up broken computers and I give them to kids who can't afford computers. He said, I'm trying to turn it into a nonprofit. And I said,
Mhm.
well, what would you need to turn that into a nonprofit? And he said, I need more computers. And I said, I need more kids.
Yeah.
And I said, well, you need to meet this woman over here. Her name is Ange, and she runs this organization in Detroit called Arts and Scraps. It does basically what you're trying to do, but they do it with art supplies. And so I brought her over. I introduced the two of them. They sat there and they talked for like 45 minutes. What I later found out is that they then continued to have that conversation like once a month. And she's been very helpful to him. And he's now got a nonprofit that's operating in 3 different states. And so that kind of moment is serendipity. If I could bottle that up, that would be the magic. Uh, the thing is, you can't make serendipity happen. It just sort of happens. But what you can do is you can create circumstances in which it is more likely to happen.
Mhm.
And that's what you're trying to do is how do we create conditions under which people are coming together and it's more likely to happen. And the skill set is frankly different than being a content creator. The skill set
Yeah.
is more like being a party host. It's more like introducing everybody and going, oh, you are interested in this. You should go talk to Joe. Joe's interested in that too. And
Yeah.
being able to make all of those different connections. So I think that's what you're trying to do. When you look at the digital tools that are out there, I tend to put them into two groups. I mean, you look at the internet. I think one of the big stories of the first 30 years of the internet is that publishing tools became much cheaper, much easier to use, much more accessible. 30 years ago when I started in radio, if you wanted to reach a mass audience, you needed big expensive equipment. You needed a team of trained professionals who knew how to run it. You needed
Mhm.
a radio tower, a printing press, a television studio.
Yeah.
Now you just need a cell phone.
Yeah.
And so you've had all these publishing tools, whether it's WordPress or YouTube or TikTok or whatever, that have made publishing much more accessible. But I think what we're seeing now is the rise of a new class of tools, which I'll call space building tools
Mhm.
that allow people to come together. And that's things like Facebook groups, LinkedIn groups, Slack, Zoom, Discord,
Mhm.
various virtual event platforms. And in some cases, you've got things that are a combination. I mean, Facebook is a weird combination. The news feed is a publishing tool. The groups are a space building tool. Same with LinkedIn.
Mhm.
StreamYard is sort of a little bit of a combination of both. It's
Right.
obviously a publishing tool. It's for getting content out there, but it does allow some interaction. The interaction is mostly between the audience and the host.
Yeah.
It's less of that side to side, but you could see pairing StreamYard with one of those online groups, like a Facebook group or something, which allows
Yeah,
for
and that's what we're streaming to right now is a Facebook community, that has tens of thousands of people in that community. So, you know, being a part of this program does connect you up with a much larger pool of creators that
yeah.
can connect in these tools, and it's also available on Facebook and all those platforms too. It's just, it still feels like it's a heavy lift to be able to do some of these things, and to be able to really take advantage of the opportunity that I think is growing in its importance. So, because I'm increasingly hearing more people say that building community is now the current kind of hot thing to do. And why do you think that is? What is happening, do you think, Seth, in our society and our culture that's causing that? I think maybe you alluded to it when you first came in a little bit about people feeling kind of disconnected from others.
I, I, I think
Yeah,
that's part of it, but I think the other part of it that plays a really important role is that there's too much content out there. I mean, as these content tools have become cheaper and easier and more accessible,
yeah,
everybody can create content now, and everybody can. I have this experience every night. Every night, me and my girlfriend, we sit down on the couch to watch television,
yeah,
and we log into Netflix or Hulu or Amazon Prime or Disney
right,
or HBO Max or what, and there's 300 shows that we've never heard of before.
right,
And so we start trying to figure out, and she'll like one and I'll veto it, and then I'll like one and she'll veto it, and then we find one we like, we start cross-referencing with Rotten Tomatoes, and before you know it, an hour and a half has gone by and we're like, it's too late to start anything, let's just go to bed.
yeah,
um there's so much content out there
right.
that
Yeah,
this
so what
idea that
makes something stand out, right? That
right.
gets you engaged and connected to it, and oftentimes it's personality.
Hmm.
You know, a a show that can inspire some emotion, inspire some, like you said earlier about a mission, right? There's a purpose to being there. There's a reason that I need to be here, and I get great insight into ways that I can get better as a creator, or I can get better as a person.
Yeah.
Are compelling reasons to join a particular community. That's why people join masterminds, or they are increasingly grouping up with these kind of paid consultant platforms, or instructors that are trying to help people grow and develop their businesses, or their personal brands, or whatever. And I think, the more I think about it, the more I think about, kind of its personality. And it's also about what kind of content that you're creating and how that maybe is helpful or not. And because not every content creator can create content that is, every minute of your content is going to be a takeaway that they can go take action on, right? So there's got to be another layer, and that's what we're talking about, is that other layer of personal connection, right?
Yeah, the way I often think about it is content is what gets people in the door the first time.
Right.
Connection or community is what
Is
gets
what
them
should
coming
fall
back
out.
the second, third,
Right.
right? So let's take podcast movement again. I guess I'm going to use this example a million times today,
Yeah,
but
you are.
you know, when you and I first started going to podcast movement, we went because we wanted to learn more about podcasting.
Yeah.
You now know everything there is to possibly know about podcasting. So I can't
Well,
imagine
thanks
that
for
you're.
that. I appreciate that. Right.
I mean, I can't
My
imagine that
brain is getting bigger and bigger by the minute as you say that. Right.
I can't imagine that the prime reason you're going these days is because you're dying to sit in and watch the sessions.
No, well, actually, that's as far away from the reason that I go as possible. So
right.
it's not that. Not to say that I don't have something to learn. I do have
No,
something to learn. I just would rather learn it from talking to people out in the hall or in the exhibition
right.
area. Right.
And that's the trend that we're seeing in events. You know, I think more broadly is that it used to be that the content was what drove people, especially conferences like this, that was what drove
Hmm.
people to come. Now they can get the content just about anywhere because of the
Right.
internet. It's the
That's true.
connection. That's why they're coming. And you're starting to see event organizers talk about this in the event organizing space, and how they're having to rethink their events to go, okay, how do we allow that connection to happen? And sometimes, again, it's as simple as putting out chairs and tables, or building in space between the sessions for people to talk, or having things like brain dates. But really, that connection is what's happening more and more.
Do you think that could be the next big evolution here of events, is that they kind of move away from these like panel models, and they move towards creating more one-on-one type of instructional opportunities? And the reason I might suggest that is because maybe it could give more opportunities for more creators to share ideas with smaller groups of creators, that would get more people involved in helping teach others. I don't know what you think
Yeah.
about that.
I mean, I think it certainly could be, I mean, as somebody who's organized events in the past, usually when we're doing panels, it's often because it's the way to get the most people up on stage. And so you have more people who you can say are speakers at your event.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I could absolutely see a move away from that. I think the other thing that you're seeing with events is that it used to be that people met for the first time at events and then used the internet afterwards to maintain that relationship.
Hmm.
And now I think increasingly, because there are these new space building tools, you are finding people who are meeting online and then going to an event so that they can meet in person the people that they've been
Yeah.
talking to online.
Yeah.
And so
So
it's
it's a
kind of
different
flipped.
reason to actually go to an event than, I think what most people would say. Looks like Uncle Fatty has a comment in here. I was real hesitant in saying that word. I'm sorry, but it seems so insensitive. But anyway, live streaming is changing the world is the comment here, and I I do kind of wonder about that, Seth. Do you think that live streaming is a little bit of a way to accomplish this? And I that's what's attractive to me about it, because I mean that's a
Yeah.
lot of the reason why I go to podcasting conferences is to connect with people and doing it live and being able to bring in questions, and see what people are thinking out there and be able to have that connect with others is seems like a powerful thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'll be honest. I did not understand live streaming at first,
Hmm.
and the person who made me understand it was a guy named Sean Tempesta, who he was doing afternoons. Now he's got his own morning show in Las Vegas on the radio, and he had started producing a live streaming game show that he would do, and and I didn't get the concept, because to me I was sitting there going, you know, why, when there are things like Marvel movies or Game of Thrones out in the world, why would you want to watch somebody play a video game on live stream or
Hmm.
have somebody read comments? And the example that he gave me is, he said, look, we've got a show, it's got a cast of characters. It's kind of like Howard Stern in that, there's all these regulars that and we have one guy. He goes, I love the guy, but everybody else thinks he's annoying. And so we do this thing where if you donate $5, you can mute him for 5 minutes. And we've gone shows where for the entire 2 hours he was not
Wow.
allowed to talk at all. And
Wow.
and this floored me, and I tried to, and it finally made me realize that the power of the live stream is is the fact that the audience has some sort of, not control, but input over what happens on the screen. Like when I was in high school, I loved the book Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is a piece of literature. Dude invented languages and genealogies and worlds and all this kind of stuff. I also enjoyed choose your own adventure books. Choose your own adventure books are in no way the level of literature that Lord of the Rings is,
Yeah.
but I had influence over the direction of the story. And I
Mhm.
think that's the power of live streaming, is that, the people that we're seeing who are watching this can actually influence where this broadcast is going to go,
Yeah, they
and can
can,
make it
yeah.
go in interesting places. And so I think that's the power of it. Now I think the extra step then is, okay, once people get used to seeing, Uncle Fatty or whoever it is on the broadcast, then how do they go connect with Uncle Fatty if you're another audience member?
Right.
And so you got to create an additional space. So often it's about linking multiple tools together, and even multiple tools and old-fashioned in-person events together,
Yeah. Yeah, and then Mike,
stitching all those.
right, and then Mike posting here, "Content is king," which is how we've traditionally thought about content, right?
Yeah,
It's what
I'm
drives the engagement, right? But
I'm gonna disagree. I think content used to be king. I think we are watching content get dethroned.
so you
Uh,
think, well, let's dissect that a little bit,
yeah.
because content is actually garnering huge attention. But I guess what is maybe the intangible here, or one that's maybe not thought of, is what that content does to the audience, right? And how the audience reacts to that content, right?
Well, and
So,
it's also getting sliced up smaller and smaller as everybody's,
right.
look,
Well,
at the end of
and
the day,
longer at the same time, right?
right? But at the end of the day, the thing that we're all competing for is attention. That's the finite limiting resource. I mean, Seth Godin talked about this 20 years ago in permission marketing, that finite resource that we're all competing for is attention. And as everybody's producing more and more content, it's getting harder and harder to get that attention. The idea that content is king was that if you produce the highest quality, best content, that would naturally rise to the top.
Yeah,
And I think that
it's the better mousetrap story, right?
yeah, but I think that assumes a certain amount of scarcity. You know, I mean, the example I give is I've got a front lawn. You know, I'm sure that there's one blade of grass in that lawn that is greener and lusher and healthier than all the others.
Right.
But I don't know which one it is because I don't have the attention span to go through and find it all. And I think that's where we're getting to with content, is that there's just so much content that, look, Charlie Bit My Finger does not rise to the same level as Hamlet. And yet, you know, it goes viral. And so I think where we're coming to a place where community is going to be king, you know, and I think that's going to be the new world. I don't know that we're there yet, but I think it's coming.
So what do you think of the comment from Uncle Fatty again? Engagement content is more than just content. So does the content need to be different to create that connection?
I think the content can help create the connection, but I don't think you can create the connection with content alone. You know, I just
okay. There's got to be other tools like we've been
there's
talking
got to be
about.
other tools. You've got to couple it. You know, it's got to be content coupled with a space. And how do you build that space? And content is often what attracts people into that space the first time. I'll give you an example. I've been hosting a series of virtual events with the National Association of Broadcasters. And the challenge in the broadcasting industry is we don't know where the next generation of broadcasters are coming from, because you know the job isn't as sexy as it used to be, and it doesn't pay as well as it used to pay. And so we've really made an effort to cultivate that next generation. So we're hosting these virtual events where broadcasting students can come and professional broadcasters can come, and they can meet up and they can connect. Now, when we do that, for example, we did one earlier this week, and we recorded an interview with it. The interview was about 5 tips for putting your demo reel together so that you can land your first television job. I think for a lot of the students who showed up, they came because they wanted those tips about the demo reel. But the reason that they're going to come back to the next one is they went, oh, I met a bunch of people. It was really cool. I got to sit there and talk to the play-by-play announcer for the Boston Red Sox. I want to do that again. And so I'll show up. So I'm beginning to think that the fatty might not refer to weight.
I don't think it is either. I think it's a loaded term that
I do too.
has now been debunked.
Is he sponsored by a cannabis company? Is this just a theory?
It's a weight loss strategy here. But yeah, it's funny. Well, and that's, you know, that's an example. I mean, I think getting your audience to have some fun in here and not take themselves too seriously is also a good thing to see as well. And I thank you all for that.
But now, isn't everybody curious to go talk to Uncle Fatty? Like, don't you all want to go find a place where you can talk to Uncle Fatty and find out what's really going on there? You know?
Yeah. And have they always been skinny?
Right.
So anyway, it's always it's the struggle of our time, right? Everybody wants, you know, to be something different than they are. So it's always interesting to see that. And then I say, Allie writes here, Kick or Keep is a show the huge streamer Destiny produced. I'm not sure I fully follow your comment or question. Do you understand that, Seth?
No.
Okay.
Not at all.
So maybe I wasn't seeing it right, but if you wanted to re-ask the question so we have a better understanding, it would be great, because it looks like you're on to something here. So once you dig that out a little bit.
Can I talk about something else? And it's just because you mentioned it about the problems of our time. You know, one of the things that has come out in the last couple of years is the epidemic of loneliness, not only in this country, but around the world. I mean, the Surgeon General wrote a report about it. The World Health Organization has now talked about it. And it's become a real problem. And I think part of the reason it's become a problem is because we're all on our phones all day consuming
Right.
content all the time. Often when we have people sitting right next to us or
Yeah.
standing around us that we could interact with, and we aren't. And I think that kind of proves the point that content is not the same as community. That community is really about that engagement. And so I think this concept of community building is allowing us to hopefully address that issue head on.
Yeah.
And it plays a role in other places. I mean, I was a political science student in college. That was my major, and one of the books that I had to read was a book called Bowling Alone. It's by a guy named Robert Putnam.
Uh-huh.
And Putnam argued that you were seeing in America the decline of a lot of social institutions that bred community, things like the Boy Scouts, things like people
Yeah,
going
that
to
brought
church,
people together in real life, right?
Shriners,
Yeah.
all those kinds of things. And he thought it was a concern. And he argued that this community building, he called it social capital, was really important to, among other things, a functioning democracy.
Mhm.
And I can't help if wonder if part of the reason we are seeing our democracy not be so healthy at the moment is because we have been moving away from community and just moving towards content. And if maybe all of us as content creators who could then create community around stuff,
Yeah.
have a role to play that is not only addressing loneliness and individual health, but
Mhm.
also could help things like democracy. I mean, I don't want to overstate the case, but I really do think that there's a role there.
Well, and I think that there's a reason why people are pulling back for economic reasons, and also maybe people are getting a feeling like maybe going to these in-person events, the, the assumptions of the value of going to these events hasn't always worked out to be true.
Yeah.
So that gets back to this earlier discussion that we have, is maybe the events need to change to position themselves to bring more value to their
Yeah.
their attendees, right? And their sponsors.
Absolutely. Here's Paul saying,
Yeah.
it was
All
great to
about
meet
podcast movement.
the StreamYard crew at Podcast Movement. And I think that just shows that when you are able to make those connections with people in person,
Yeah.
it makes you, it probably makes him a bigger fan of StreamYard, and he can go in and talk. And again, they have a shared purpose, somebody who's using StreamYard and somebody who, works
Right.
for StreamYard. We're all trying to make people better StreamYard users.
Right. And I think the customers to anything, right, whether it be StreamYard or any of companies out there, if they have met someone from that company in person,
Hmm.
it creates an instant connection with them. That's why everybody here, I would love to meet you at some event at some point. Come up and say that you've watched my show before, and that you joined, and maybe you commented or whatever. Let me know that. I would love to meet people in person more. And then let's say here's another comment too. I mean, I've been going to these live podcasting events for many, many years,
Yeah.
and StreamYard is going to be at the next podcast movement in Los Angeles coming up in a couple weeks.
Oh, the
So
evolutions. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So if you happen to be living in Los Angeles or in that surrounding area, whether it be Arizona or Nevada or any of that area there, you can just go to Los Angeles and attend the largest podcasting conference. It's at podcastmovement.com if you're interested in that. And then and it looks like Allie writes, you can live like
Live.
those books
Interact.
almost.
You can you can live interact like the choose your own adventures. Yeah.
Right,
Yes.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Right. No, I think that's right. I think the other thing when we're talking about the difference between audience and community is the size. When you're playing the audience game, when you're a content creator, you need to reach the biggest audience that you can. And that's
Right.
really how you're measured, is by how big the audience is. When you're dealing with community, I think it's much more about the right people and the depth of
Mhm,
those relationships.
mhm.
And podcast movement's an example where, I mean, it's the biggest podcasting conference in the world, but it's 3,000 people at the end of the day. I mean, I used to DJ in the club on a Saturday night. And we got almost 3,000 people. So it's not like it's a huge number of people,
Yeah.
but it's the right people. And so if you're Rode microphones and you built the Rodecaster 2 just for podcasters, you need to be there in front of those 3,000 people whether there's a pandemic or not, and so I think it really does become about, the depth and the quality of those relationships and not just the size of your audience.
Yeah, and I think that, it's a good example to actually think about this from the standpoint that, if you're going to an event like that, even if it has 3,000 people and we consider that to be a fairly small number, that's still 3,000 people. And I know I've gone to many of these events and I don't feel like I've really connected with that many people, right?
Right,
It's
right,
difficult for people to connect with 3,000 people in just a couple of days, right? It's just
right,
not
right,
not not possible. So these events have a responsibility, just like the content creator has, to facilitate those connections as much as I can. And I'm open to ideas from the audience here, around ways that I can better connect with you on this program too. Is there something different than I could do or try and facilitate? I have thought about trying to pull together meetups in New York and other places to try and entice people to come out of their home offices to actually meet someone in person. So might be something I could try. But I don't know. Is there any ideas that you have, Seth, on that?
yeah. I mean, I would marry it with, virtual events. Marry the live streams, but then also do a virtual event where people can talk. And I think you need, another platform that'll do that. I use
Right.
Remo, and I don't view Remo as a competitor to StreamYard. I view it as something that would complement what
Kind of
StreamYard
kind of
does.
add to it. Right.
Yeah, yeah, would add to it. For example, there's a guy named Adrian Salisbury who does a lot of online courses, and I met him. Uh, I didn't meet him. I became familiar with him for the first time because I was watching his YouTube tutorials, and then I started taking his courses, and he would do live streams once a week to help people and then answer their questions. But then, also then do Zoom calls with everybody. And the difference between the live stream was that he could do a larger audience and sort of take uh, comments from people and respond to them. But then it was a little bit more individual when there was a space. And so I think complementing those things and I think really to build a space, you're probably stitching together a number of different tactics and techniques depending on the group that you're assembling.
Yeah, and I like this comment that was it Uncle Fatty wrote to for real. Verbal Combat. I guess it's a show that's every Friday night or whatever, is all about crowd and chat
And chat
engagement.
engagement. Yep. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
that can be, there's a couple of shows on this StreamYard channel that do kind of that Q&A. And occasionally I think I've done a couple of episodes where I brought on a guest who was a member of the audience to be my guest, and then the whole show is really a Q&A
Right.
about what the audience is wanting to talk about. And what's a difficult balance sometimes, I come into a show and I create a topic and a theme just like I did tonight, and I don't sometimes stick to that topic because the community wants to take me off on a different direction.
Yeah.
And
It's
that's the juggle. So I get a topic to get people here, but then when they come here, they don't always get exactly what I teased them to be here about.
it's kind of like improvisational theater, if you've ever seen it.
Right. Yeah.
Improv doesn't work when one person tries to steer it in a particular way. Improv
Right.
is really about what
Because
exists between the actors,
yeah,
not
yeah. Well, it's kind of what the mob wants to make it, right? I mean, if
yes.
you're bringing in a big community, they may have a different idea of what they would like.
Right.
And
Anyone else find it amusing that two guys who previously didn't get the whole live stream thing now live streaming? Yeah, I mean, I think that's, you know, I think it's always going to be people who weren't doing it before and get it now,
yeah, sure,
and come
sure.
on
I think
board.
I've got a lot to learn from it too. Though I have been doing live streaming with my new media show that I've been doing for about 12 or 13 years. So I do have a little bit of exposure to it, but certainly
Yep.
nothing at the interactive level that this program offers. And I think that's really, for me, that's really what the difference is here. I mean, occasionally I'll use this platform, the StreamYard platform, to do my new media show with my co-host, and he's, he's into that too. He loves the interactive audience thing, and will mention comments in Facebook even when we're not using StreamYard. But it does add a different dimension. I've always liked it because I used to be on live radio, and I know you probably have
Right.
been too, right? And take callers or bring in
Yeah,
guests.
I was just
Right,
thinking that is that live streaming. I mean, before there was the live streaming software that we all know today, it was radio when you were taking callers, and
right,
the callers would shape where the broadcast would go. And
right.
as the DJ, you didn't always know, like and frankly, taking calls was always my favorite part of being a DJ. Was the idea of we don't know what's going to happen when we pick up this phone, and let's see how I react to it, and what happens. And frankly, in a lot of radio, you don't have that anymore because so much of it is voice tracked ahead of time.
Yeah.
Outside of the morning show.
Yeah, and Allie has a good question here too. What do you define as content? And I think it's, from one perspective, it's an interesting question because what is this content that we're actually even doing in this program? And
Right.
it's short storytelling, and it's also giving testimonial to life experience. And that's kind of the two components of what this show really is about. And then you, as the viewers of this program, are giving testimonial about how your brain is processing the information that you see in the world, and then sharing it with us, and that opens up our minds. So content to us, I think, in this program is much more open to a kind of a broad discussion stroke.
Yeah.
And that's what I try and position this show. This is different than doing a traditional podcast where I have, a very strict outline and I'm going to stick to it. I create an outline for this show, but it's like, I don't know why I bother, because it's like I never follow it. So it's really, it's more about mental preparation for whatever topic that is. And so content is really, for me with this show, and as you've said, Seth, is really content about engagement. And
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a good question that she raises, and I'd be curious to see what some of the definitions of content are out there. But I think of content as something that you passively consume, whether it's a book, a television show, a
it's more about
podcast
lean
episode.
back. It's more of a
Yes,
lean
it's more
back
about
thing.
lean back,
Okay.
as opposed to a conversation where there's very
Or
much
a
a back
lean
and forth, and
forward
I'm
where you're actively listening,
contributing to it, right?
adding comments, questions, like I'm seeing in the thread here,
Right.
a-
And
around
and
this
so
show.
something like these live streams are they're almost somewhere in between.
Hmm.
It's not a full-blown conversation, but it's also not just sitting back and watching television either.
Hmm.
It's weird to see how technology can blur these lines.
Yeah. Beauty Bubble does have a good point here. Collaboration is certainly part of the royal court of any content. So it's true. That's why I like to have guests on this program. Now, I could do this show as just a solo show that's an interactive discussion program, and there is a show on this StreamYard channel that does that. It's just really kind of one person. Maybe there's a couple channels that do this. I think I'm the only one that brings in a regular guest, I think, to create conversation. But I'm also doing a live show too, and not all the shows here on the StreamYard channels are live shows. Some are pre-produced and things like that. So,
Yeah.
but you can create all sorts of different kinds of content, and that's kind of the key takeaway. It kind of depends on what kind of content you want to create. So that leads back to the earlier question, right? Is
Yeah.
what kind of experience are you trying to create with your community?
Yeah.
Community can be built with on-demand pre-recorded content, but I do think it has its own unique challenges.
Yeah, I mean, I think that content can certainly play a role. I mean, one of the things that I was thinking about while we were talking about this is, when I remember my freshman year of college, they were showing the Rocky Horror Picture Show,
Hmm.
and I'd never seen it before.
Mhm.
And I walked in and the audience was screaming things at the screen. And somehow the audience knew all the things that they were supposed to say in response to all the lines of dialogue at all
They've
the
been
right time.
trained.
Right, they've been trained, and so it was pre-recorded content, but there was an audience participation
Yeah.
form of it, and I think because the audience was all participating together and saying things in unison, they all felt connected to each other. Not unlike you go to a church and there are certain call and response elements to a sermon that make the people feel connected to each other. So, I think it's interesting, and I think it's something that's happened before the technology could do what it does now. But it's interesting to watch how the technology, takes it even a step further.
So Paul has another question here. Say, what are the top events you like to attend? He writes here, I wanted to attend Vid Summit to meet people monetizing podcasts and videos. Um,
Yeah,
I
and
think,
you notice to meet people,
right. Well, yeah, that's probably the primary reason.
yeah,
Because like you said, Seth, you can learn a lot of this stuff off of online videos, but you can't have that human interrelationship contact via online videos, unless you're doing something like this, which is probably as close as you're going to get to that, right?
yeah. I'll tell you what event I'd really like to go to that I have not been to. You were mentioning these platforms, some of these platforms that allowing people to teach. I've been using Kajabi lately,
Good job,
and
yeah.
I've really liked it. And part of why I've liked it is because of the product itself and the functionality. But part of it is that there's a really robust Facebook group there where people are really helpful to each other in terms of using the product.
Hmm.
And they do a big event once a year, which I have some friends who have gone, but I've never gone, and so I'd like to go and learn more and build relationships with some of those people that I see over and over in that group. And there's another piece of software I use. I won't name it, but it's one that's been recommended to me that's very helpful. But the community is not active, and I
Hmm.
can't get answers when I need help or I'm trying to get through something. And so, you know, I, I'm I use the software because I like what it's supposed to do, but I don't feel any affinity for it, or because I'm not connected to other people who are also using it.
Yeah, it's kind of remarkable sometimes. I I'm shocked sometimes when I go to some events that don't seem like they're significant events, but they have such a vibrant community around them that it's kind of like unexpected. It's like I'm shocked when I show up, and it's like, I recently did an event down in New Jersey, and I didn't know what to expect. I was the keynote speaker presenter down there at this event, and it was doing a kind of like an in-person event as well as kind of like a Zoom call with people from all over the world that were coming into this presentation that I was doing. I mean, it's part of a bigger kind of group of people that were up talking about podcasting, but it was shocking to me that you could have this experience of being in front of a live audience of like 50, 60, 70 people is what was in this office that I was doing this in. And then off of a camera, there was like a couple hundred people that were on a Zoom call that were experiencing and coming into it too, and creating that kind of um, it, it was really a in-person kind of virtual video type of, really kind of where the questions were coming from the Zoom community and coming from the office right in front of me, of people that I could, actually reach out and give a hug to or something like that. So it's this kind of hybrid that we're seing, I think,
Yeah.
happen. It is an opportunity.
I'll be honest, I'm not bullish on hybrid events.
Okay.
I I like them.
Yeah.
In part because again, it's hard to do that connection uh, that way, but also because even if you can get the technology right, and I think
But
it's
if
hard to
you
get the technology.
combine the virtual with the in-person, at least you're getting a little bit of the in-person part of it, which is different than the pure
Yeah,
virtual
it's
experience,
it's
right?
tough to do well, and even if you have the technological staff and the technology to
Mhm,
pull it off,
mhm.
frankly, the speakers are usually not prepared. It's hard to be a speaker, to be able to speak to the room and to be able to speak. I mean, look, this is
Oh, it
why,
is. Right.
you look at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and there's all these times where the jokes fall flat with the room, but are great for the wider audience that's watching on TV, or
Well,
vice
yeah.
versa.
Yeah,
You know,
because I'm sure they get clipped and turned
right?
into memes and all sorts of stuff, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm fine with recording sessions and making them available on demand, but I think hybrid events should go. I
You just want the clean
do
separation, right? It's either
do one
virtual or
thing
it's
and do it
in.
well. Yeah.
Right, right.
Now,
Yeah,
I do think virtual events are very important. I'm a big believer in virtual events as a supplement. So do your big live in-person conference once a year, and then do a virtual event, once a month. And those are going to be smaller satellite events, but they allow you to stay in contact with people. I like that. So
yeah, so this comment from Mike is, "If you provide great content regardless of what that content is, people will be attracted to your channel." So I guess
yeah,
my question for that is that what do you consider to be great content? I think that's a very subjective view.
yeah.
Some
Look,
people consider
don't
this
do
great,
bad
some people
content.
don't. Right.
Don't do bad content, right? Bad content is
Wh-
not good. But I'm
Seth,
not.
what is
I'm not.
bad
Oh,
content? What is bad content? Can you define it for me?
it's like pornography. I know it when I see it.
Oh,
Um,
okay. Some people
uh,
like pornography though. That's the
I'm
yeah.
not saying pornography is bad content, but I don't think it's true that just because content is great, it rises to the top. I think there's lots of examples throughout history of content that was great and you know either rose to the top long after anybody realized, or frankly never got there.
Yeah.
So the other thing I'll say is that everybody's getting that same advice. Everybody is being told, do what I call mo better content. Produce more
Right.
content, produce better content. And when everybody's producing better content, you're just in a content arms race. It's just harder and harder to cut through. So I really do think, I'm not saying that content isn't important. I'm not saying you shouldn't do great content. You should. But I think if you really want to cut through, you need to do more than just create content. You need to create spaces and bring people together and connect those people.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And um looks like Uncle Fatty is saying exactly, and indeed, I'm not quite sure which part he was affirming here, but as a carpenter that used to do tool reviews and woodworking back in the day, I'd never imagined that doing it live like VCG construction would be possible. 1,000 in chat. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think that there is a bunch of shows that are being created that would have been unimaginable just maybe 10 years ago.
It's exciting. I mean, look, when you used to talk about building community, you used to be talking about building community with people who were in physical proximity to you, right? I
Right.
mean, now because of the internet and because of these new tools, we can build community across great distances. And it means that we can build niche communities. I always use the example of knitting for some reason. Like there may not be enough knitters in my local area for us all to get. I'm not that I'm a knitter, but to all get together and discuss knitting. But there may be enough that you could get them all together online to discuss
Yeah.
knitting. And frankly, be able to monetize that. You got enough knitters, you can go to Yarn Barn, and it's an obvious sponsorship play. So I think that's what's exciting about the internet is that we can build communities, but you no longer have to be geographically close to the people that you're building community with. You can now be,
Yeah.
your interests can be close.
Right. Right. And Ali raises a good comment too. Citizen journalists is a huge aspect of what's happening in our world today too. All of us can be a journalist if we choose to be, if we're willing to take the risks that are
Yeah.
associated with that nowadays.
I think journalism is really interesting because I think journalism is really important.
Yeah.
I think journalism, we talked a little bit about democracy and social capital, and I think journalism has a role to play there. We're in trouble because traditional journalism does not have a revenue model that is viable anymore. And so
Right.
we're watching all sorts of media companies, but especially, media companies that specialize in journalism, fall by the wayside. And I think that's a problem. And so as they're all starting to look for new revenue models, the message that I have to journalists is that you need to look beyond revenue models that are based solely around content.
Or
Here's an
or
example.
around ads
Right,
to some
right.
degree.
Well,
Right.
I would say ads are content, right? Like they're revolved around, we're going to give content, we're going to build an audience, and then we're going to interrupt that content with ads.
Right.
CNN Plus failed for a number of reasons, but I think one of the reasons was that what CNN Plus was giving me was more Anderson Cooper
Right. It wasn't
when
anything different than what they were giving away for free for
I
advertising.
I
Right.
don't I don't have time to consume all the content Cooper's putting out now. And I'm not
Right.
knocking him. He puts out great content, but he puts out a lot. And so the last thing I need is more Anderson Cooper. I think
Right.
what CNN could have done is put the community behind the paywall.
Right.
And what I mean is, where I would have done it was with how they do the Sunday night shows with Anthony Bourdain and Stanley Tucci. And, if
Mhm.
you just want to see somebody roam around Italy and eat things, watch the cable channel. But if
Right.
you want to log in and talk to other people who have been to Italy and you're planning a trip to Italy and you want to find out where to eat and get some real answers,
Yeah.
that's behind the paywall. That we're going to charge you $5 a month for.
Yeah.
So I'm increasingly, I mean, unless you've got something that is people are incredibly passionate about, incredibly rare, like a Marvel or a Star Wars. And even those we're seeing diminishing returns on.
So are you thinking that CNN should have granted access more
Yeah,
to their talent through that paywall? Is that what you're saying?
sure. I think that's one way to do it, but the idea is put the space behind the paywall. Don't put the content behind the paywall. Use the
Right.
content to encourage people to pay for the space.
Mhm. Yeah, Rick Savoya has a comment where he disagrees with us around content is still king. You're right. Sure, celebrities can draw crowds and clickbait can draw attention, but in the end, it's really the topics and actual discussion that draw listeners and viewers. And that is true too. I think if you are talking about things that are valuable to others and that they find interesting, and maybe this isn't, I think we do tend to, in the podcasting space, we do tend to talk about content a little bit from a nuts and bolts standpoint. It must have value to it, must deliver, takeaways to them. But I think a lot of content is consumed because of emotional reasons, not
Yeah.
necessarily reasons that are derived from getting some sort of economic benefit from learning some tip or something.
Yeah.
I think there's an experience behind this, right?
Well, the other thing I would say about this concept of king is it assumes sort of a zero sum game. Like if I'm king, you're not king, right? And
Right.
and it's
We're
because
all
I've got a
kings now, right?
right. It's because I've got a throne and I've got an army, and the people look to me as king. And when we
Right.
get to the point where everybody's got a throne and everybody's got an army, then nobody's king, right? And I think that's what we're talking about now that everybody can create content.
It's
And again, I think
the
we're transitioning.
democratization, right?
Right,
Of
right. And so I think what we're seeing is I'm not consuming content anymore because I'm sifting through all the content and choosing the best. Quite often I'm, choosing content for completely arbitrary reasons, like it just happens to be in front of me,
mhm.
and because there's just so much out there.
Yeah, that's true. Nader has a comment here too. Says he says 90% for the audience, 10% for the mark. I'm not sure what the
With
mark
Mark.
means, but it's too much different point and way to be creator. Said, and we are cool with it. So not quite sure what you mean by 10% for the mark. Is that um, I'm not sure. I don't know. Do you understand that, Seth? Okay.
Mm-mm.
If you wanted to restate that, we can maybe try and decipher that and give you an answer. So thank you for the comment here.
I will say this is a different way of thinking about things. And as somebody who's been a content creator my whole life, and you've been a content creator your whole life, it's a different framework. It's a different way of thinking about it. And frankly, requires a different set of skills than the one I've been cultivating my whole life.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, you're basically becoming a facilitator of people's interactions is what
Yeah,
you're trying to accomplish.
you're becoming a
And
party host, really.
right, exactly.
you know,
You're a yeah, you're a host, right? I mean,
yeah,
if you can think about what a conference organizer is, a conference organizer is an event and community orchestrator, right? They
yeah.
create the environment at which people can connect with each other, and that's probably the role of a host is to facilitate connections.
So let's talk about this comment from Mike here. Mike says, I'm a huge collector of both comics and coins. I
Mhm.
give away gold, silver, and comics on my channel totally free. I didn't experiment if people show up for giveaways or content, and trust me, it's content. I think that's right. I think contests. I think content's going to win over contests, and I say this coming from radio, which I think is the last medium that still really does a lot of contesting. Um, I also think they think about the stuff that they're giving away wrong. And this was something that I didn't realize until I really started reading the literature um, around community building. That people are motivated by different things,
Mhm.
and there are external motivations and there are internal motivations. So an external motivation is either I'm doing something because I want a reward, or because I'm trying to avoid a punishment. Whereas internal is I'm just driven to do it because it's who I am. So if I need a ride to the airport, I can call an Uber. The Uber driver is only going to take me to the airport if I pay him. He is externally motivated.
Mhm.
Or I could call you and say, hey, will you give me a ride to the airport? And you'd probably do it because you're like, that's my friend, and that's what we do for friends. I'll give him a ride to the airport. Yeah, no problem. And then I might thank you by taking you out to dinner. And if I
Right.
did, it's not a quid pro quo. It's not if I'll take you to dinner if you give me a ride to the airport. It's just a gesture by which I am, showing you and saying that I appreciate your internal motivation. So when you're thinking about the stuff that you're giving away, I think don't think about it as a bribe. And I think this is the problem. Too much of radio thinks about it as a bribe. They give away cash and they think that they're bribing people to listen. I think giving away something like a bumper sticker or a keychain or a T-shirt is in a lot of ways much more powerful because it's not that you're doing it to bribe them. You're doing it to thank them. Hey, you know what? You listened to me.
It's like a
I
token of
It is
sorts.
exactly a token. That's exactly the right word. Yes, it is a token, a show of appreciation. And
Mhm.
so I think if you're thinking about the comics or coins that you're giving away as a bribe to get them to come out to the event, yeah, that's not that effective. But if you think of it as a token and say, hey, you're really into this and I'm really into this and I appreciate and I want a sign that we're both really into this, then I think it becomes a lot more powerful.
Speaking of the bribe here, I do have a giveaway at the end of the show.
Which will make it a token, right? This is
Right,
to
right.
thank you for showing you up.
It's a StreamYard Puddles duck and a StreamYard mug. So enter hashtag the yard in your comment field, and you will get entered into the drawing. Let me get in here and really kind of fully activate the tool here. It's been gathering them already, so it'll pick them up here. So it looks like we're up to 28 entries so far. So if you wanted to get in your entry, just follow the instruction of this little ticker that's going on the screen if you happen to be watching, and just type in hashtag the yard all together, one word, and that'll automatically get you added to the giveaway here. And then all you have to do is send me an email to let me pull that up here, and then I'm gonna share a little bit information about Seth and how to get a hold of him. But what you'll do if you win the giveaway here and get these merch items, send me an email with your mailing address, and we will get those shipped out to you. So I just like to throw that in here occasionally, so people see it and see my email address, so they can send me a message or so. But I wanted to pull up Seth's website here so you guys can all kind of see um, what he's built online, and I'll show his page about his community building project that he's working on, but this is his website. So you can certainly go there, and his address is just his name, Seth Resler here. I'll pull it up on the screen. And you can read all about Seth and all the cool things he's been doing. And then let's go to your community page here, and we'll get that shared up on the screen here. So tell us about this website and what you're trying to accomplish with this. And is there a way that the audience can engage with this website and connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is Community Marketing Revolution. This is the company that I just launched. And again, my goal was to take these community building principles that I was seeing primarily in Silicon Valley, primarily among software as a service companies, and find a blueprint and a model that arts and entertainment brands could use and that content creators could use. How do you launch a community around your brand? How do you grow a community around your brand? How do you monetize a community around your brand? And really putting that all together. And so I've developed this blueprint, and it involves all the different components we're talking about. It involves virtual events. It involves an online group like a Facebook group or a LinkedIn group. And it involves in-person events. And so it's about putting those together step by step. I've got a mini course there that you can take that is all about creating your community roadmap. And so it'll help you think through a lot of these different principles and figure out how they apply to you, starting with what's the shared mission among all the members of my community? And then how do I build a space for them? So you can do that. If you are really interested in it, I'm available as a consultant. I do a la carte consulting, which means you just pay for the time you want and you book it. And then we talk and we put it all together. And I'm going to launch a bigger course. It's going to be a 21-day challenge, getting your first virtual event up and off the ground so that you can bring your community members together in a space and allow them to connect with each other.
Okay, yeah, and it looks like you can also just give your name and email address and get a free guide that lists 50 ways to monetize a community. So if you're
Yeah.
looking to leverage your live stream or add some elements to it that can help build those community connections, it looks like Seth's got some tips for you that all you have to do is sign up for his newsletter. I'm assuming it's a newsletter too, or
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Well, I
Okay.
blog regularly, produce videos, so I'll send you all the different, stuff that I'm working on that'll help you build this community. But I think once you get into this idea of let's build a space, all of a sudden the possibilities for revenue generation get a lot bigger. There's just more ways that you can
There's
monetize
a lot more
that go
options.
beyond just ads and sponsorship.
Yeah, and I think that's really key. I'm not really starting to think that advertising is really going to be the big way that people monetize content as you look to the future. I think these direct relationships and communities and things like that are going to become important.
I've
Yeah.
really soured on advertising, and keep in mind, my salary for pretty much my entire career has been paid in some form or another by advertising revenue.
Right.
But yeah, I agree. I just as more and more content is pumped out there, it's just harder and harder for companies to reach the critical mass they need to make that revenue just from advertising. And it's why you've seen so many media companies fold. I mean, we lost 20,000 media jobs last year. And by some estimates, we're on track to lose even more. It's because the revenue model of these media companies were built and premised on a world where it was hard to create content, and so content was scarce. And now that it's easy to create content and there's a ridiculous amount of content out there, those revenue models are not holding up. And
Right.
yes, it's legacy brands, radio and television, but it's also things like Disney and Sirius radio and Spotify. But you're also seeing it even among digital companies. Pitchfork is gone. I mean, Rooster Teeth just folded.
Yeah.
And
I saw that.
what was it, 2 years ago that YouTube came to podcast movement for the first time, and basically they handed the floor over to Rooster Teeth and said, look at these guys, they're fantastic. I couldn't believe
Yeah.
that's now gone under.
Well, now YouTube is all in on podcasting now, so that's the big thing. I
Right.
saw them over in London at the podcast show couple of years ago, and I was like, "Oh, here comes YouTube," because they're
Yep.
actually sponsoring a big European podcast event, which definitely opened up the door for their involvement. I've yet to see them really do a lot here at a podcast conference in the U.S. So I don't
Yeah.
know if that's coming or if they're going to actually head down that path or not.
And
So
you look at the guys who are making money hand over fist, it's the aggregators. It's the YouTubes, the Googles, the Facebooks. They aren't
yeah,
creating a lot of content. They're just, aggregating content from people who are.
yeah, and and the great comments keep coming in from from Paul and others in this group in this community of sorts. So I think Paul comments here. I think showing up and meeting new people is always a great way to get new ideas as well as finding out what's trending today,
Yeah.
what's the hot thing today, and that's hopefully what I'm doing with this show is to highlight kind of where the industry is moving towards and sharing some ideas. Now, granted, you're not going to get every solution and answer given to you on a silver platter on this program because you're going to be inspired to think of creative solutions for you based on the information you have here because there is no one solution to all this. Seth, I mean, what's your thoughts on how to determine what the right solution is for you? Is there any ideas that you have on that?
Yeah. So, I would say start by saying, am I going for an audience play or am I going for a community play? And
Hmm.
there's reasons to go in either direction. If you feel like you can do size and do it really well, I
Hmm.
would do an audience play. I mean, if I were iHeartMedia, I wouldn't turn around and start implementing a community strategy. They are already well invested in a strictly audience size play. But if
Right.
I were a smaller radio broadcasters, I would absolutely be thinking about community because I think that they have an opportunity and a way to monetize um, smaller audiences, smaller communities, really, through those deeper relationships. So I would start there and you know figure out which way you want to go. And if you think you're the next Joe Rogan, Joe Rogan should not be doing a community strategy. He doesn't need to because of his size. If you think you can do that, more power to you. But I think if you decide that community is the right way to go, you sometimes hear the saying, "The riches are in the niches." I think that's almost right. I think the riches are in building spaces for the niches, and
No, I
and
think if
that's
you
something I can do.
Yeah, I think if you look at it from the perspective of maybe a Tony Robbins, maybe a better
Mhm.
example of a guy that's really built a community around his content.
Yeah,
He has a podcast and things like that, but I don't see that as his primary thing. His primary thing is in-person events and
yeah,
his teachings that he does online. So you kind of have to, in the books that he writes and those kind of things that are really his community building tools. But he's just so good at connecting with people in real life. I mean, he's so talented at it, and
yeah, yeah.
that's the key. I I I wouldn't be surprised if he really dedicated himself. He could be bigger than Joe Rogan.
Yeah. Look, and I think that there are content creators who have a community around them. I mean, I think of the Grateful Dead, Fish. I even think Taylor Swift has done that to a large
Oh,
degree.
definitely.
You
The
know,
Swifties? Of course.
yeah, yeah, and it's interesting to look at why some bands have been able to do that and some haven't. I mean, I think television shows too. I mean, a lot of these sort of Comic-Con shows, I always liked
Or
the
South by Southwest is
Fireflies.
another one that's big, and
Yeah.
it's built its own kinda community around it
Well,
too.
and events too. Some events are just concert festivals, and some are Burning Man.
Yeah,
I was talking to a friend of mine who helped produce concerts for Life is Good uh, for a long time, and that's a brand that has really always been about community. It wasn't just about you know content, and it wasn't just about the band playing on stage. It was about the audience members connecting to each other. So
yeah. No, that's kinda what we've been talking about during this show is that kind of capability. Um, Bright Bunny Echo Gaming, writes in here. I think it's
Awoo.
By the way, do you connect your podcast to an RSS feed? It's easy, and yet YouTube already roll it out. Well,
Yes.
I don't know that YouTube is rolling out creating RSS feeds. They have rolled out the ability to ingest RSS feeds that are created through podcast hosting platforms. But this show has an audio and video RSS feed. They're two different RSS feeds. One has the video file in it, and the other one has the audio file. So you have your choice. If you miss part of this show, or you want to consume some of the past 17 episodes that I've done of this program, you can certainly go in there. They're all in there now, in Apple Podcasts and in Spotify, and you can consume it. Hopefully I'll be able to get the video version of this uploaded to Spotify for podcasters on the video side here soon. It's kind of my goal. And it's remarkable that we can do that. But it's also one of those things that they aren't really embracing podcasting with that. So it's more of a direct upload play is what that is. But yeah, it's definitely something I wanted to embrace here and show people what that looks like, to be able to do that with even a live interactive show like this one. So you can do that. But I do some editing on that show before I post it to the RSS feed, but not a lot. So it's real what it is. So
now, if you have to do a direct upload instead of using the RSS feed, is it still a podcast, or does it cease to be a podcast at that point?
Well, I guess if you were to ask Joe Rogan that question, he would say being exclusive on Spotify still means he's a podcast. So, if you look at it that way, but then if you look at what he's doing now, that would confirm the opposite of that, right? That he's now available. Joe Rogan is now available on all the podcast listening apps, as well as YouTube now. So he's on Spotify. So he would be doing like what I'm doing to some degree, except for his video that he's doing is not being put out as an RSS based video feed. So
I'll be honest, I don't care about the technical and semantic debates, other than I will say this, that radio and television did something different that I think is very interesting. That when a lot of this new technology came along, the radio industry was very quick to say these other things aren't radio, that Spotify isn't radio, Pandora isn't radio, podcasts aren't radio.
Yeah.
And I think that was to the detriment of the industry as a whole, because if those things were radio, when they were all growing and getting bigger, the story would have been radio's getting bigger and doing all these exciting things. Instead, the story became radio's revenue was declining or flat. Television, on the other hand, did not care. Television never said, oh, if it's Netflix, it's not television, right? It was never about, that wasn't a thing. And so you don't have the same sort of problem.
Right. That's true.
And I've always thought that was interesting. So I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is don't be too precious with the word podcast.
Right. No, I'm a lot more flexible than many others in the podcast community, which want to hold on to the audio only aspect of this. So
I do think once you put it up on, once you make it a video podcast, it's just a television show at that point. Like,
it's a downloadable television show, which is kind of an unusual thing if you think about it.
What's interesting, TV never cared how it was delivered. TV didn't care if it was delivered over the air through an antenna or through the cable or through the internet, through a streaming service. It was all television. Radio was like, no, unless it comes through a transmitter, it's not radio.
Yeah, right. But anyway, we should probably roll this up. It's been an hour and a half, and I definitely appreciate everybody being here for this long of a show. So I think I need to get that giveaway done at the end here. So let's go ahead and pull that up and get that done. So it looks like we're up to 35 entries. So I'll give you a few more minutes. If you have not gotten your hashtag the yard into your comment field on your preferred viewing platform. So please do that now. And Mike has another comment here. As a content creator and doing live streams, the second most important thing next to content is kindness, and kindness is contagious.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
Kindness would translate into what do you think, Seth?
I think kindness is connection.
Okay.
I think it really is. I think
Openness, is it
openness,
openness,
people connecting.
accepting of
Yeah.
others,
Yes.
being honest?
And
Right.
yeah, and it's about the way you treat other people. Kindness is what happens between people. And it's that connection. But I think absolutely kindness is hugely important. And I think if we got people together more, in these spaces, we'd see a lot more the world doesn't have enough kindness right now. And I think it's a problem. I'd like to
And
see
people are
more.
increasingly being divided by, I don't know what you want to call it, ideology or beliefs
Yeah.
that we're not embracing other people's ideas as much, and
Right.
that
And
creates
look,
problems.
I think content's playing a big role in that because content's being polarized and people are choosing the content. Now, I don't want to tell you that community can't also do that, because there's certainly examples of community which cause a lot of problems, whether it's gangs or the KKK or anything. There are communities that, uh, community is not good in and of itself. It is like
Right.
anything else. It depends on how it's used. So.
Yeah. Well, the comments keep coming in. Thank you so much, and I appreciate it. And so I'm
Thank you
gonna
for
pull
having
up.
me.
Yeah. Well, yeah, happy to have you with me. Let me pull this up on the screen, and we will display the giveaway screen here. And let me activate a little bit of music here, and we can have that playing in the background as we hit the draw button to see who wins our giveaway for StreamYard Puddles Duck and a StreamYard in the morning to drink your big cup of coffee. So let's go ahead and I'm going to try and get that ready to go. So when we're ready to push that button, it looks like we're up to 38 entries. Get your entry in quick. And if you haven't yet, looks like Barbara got hers in, and that's terrific. It looks like the questions keep coming in. All these great questions, like this one's talking about Russell Brunson
Mm-hmm.
has done building of a community of people using his software for ClickFunnels, and they got over 5,000 people at a ClickFunnel Hacker Live event.
So let me point something out here, and I think this is a really good point. She talks about how there have been smaller communities that have grown out of this main event, and this is one of the things that happens is that when a community gets too big, it starts to break into subgroups, sub-community.
Right.
I mean, I think this is something that even in podcast movement we're starting to see, where now all the podcast editors are hanging out, or
Yep.
the women who podcast, or podcasters of color, or people who play various podcasts based on genre, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
That yes, when a community gets large enough, it starts to break into smaller groups, because community works really. There's a size at which it doesn't work, or it's not effective. There's something called the auditorium effect, which is that when there's too many people in the room, everybody starts to get quiet.
That's true, because you're maybe start to get a little bit scared of maybe speaking up because the crowd is too big or something, and you get a little intimidated.
You don't feel that connection. You don't feel quite as safe. I mean, we didn't talk about it, but safety is a really important factor in community. People need to feel safe. They need to feel like they're not going to be attacked, or else they aren't going to participate. They aren't going to come to the space. So
yeah. Yes, Pete, we did change time in the U.S., so we sprung forward an hour. So this show is probably happening a little earlier than it was in the past. It definitely
I thought
was
the whole
live.
world switched times. Did we not? Wasn't that a?
Nope.
Oh, okay.
Well, there's different times of the year that different parts of the world, I guess, make changes, I guess.
Are you saying you don't recognize daylight savings time? Is that the thing?
Yeah, right. Well, you never know. People are calling in I've had people from all over the world calling into this show or joining me on this show. So it could be coming in from a different part. But let's go ahead and hit it. So we're right at 40 entries. So thank you so much for entering the giveaway here, and let's push the button here. I wish you all the luck, everybody that's entered this, and we'll get a winner here.
Ooh, do we need a drum roll?
That's why I have the music playing, but
look at
we
that.
can play the drum roller in the background. Let's see who Growing to Lie. Boy, that couldn't be a more appropriate winner here. Thank you so much.
How do you know it's not Growing to Live?
That is a good point, Seth.
I'll never forget being in radio.
Question there.
I remember being in radio, and you remember the band Live? They did Lightning Crashes and a bunch of other songs.
Yeah.
And I remember at one point they issued a press release telling people that the name of the band was Live, not Live. And I always thought it was the funniest thing in the world. And then interviewed them and asked them about that. They said, look, we just kept running into people who were mispronouncing our name. So we just wanted to let them know. So we put out a press release.
Well, it could be either one, right? So, and if you happen to be the proud person known as Growing to be Live, send me an email, rob.greenlee@gmail.com with your mailing address. And we will get you your merch out to you as soon as possible. So thank you so much, everybody, and keep coming back and getting your entry in, and hopefully I can give away some of this stuff to everyone. I was thinking about maybe doing a bonus giveaway where I could give away 2 sets of these, like maybe next week or something. So we'll see on that. Kind of, it doubles your odds, right? So but thank you, everybody, for joining me. It looks like we had a good, terrific turnout tonight with the show, and I appreciate that all the time. And tell your friends about the show. And Seth, it was great to have you joining me on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
thank you for having me. It means a lot, and I really appreciate it. And I love talking to everybody in your community. So it's exciting.
Yeah, well, thank you, and it's exciting to do this. I appreciate it, and it looks like somebody got the message with my email address. So, and I'll show a few more comments in here before I pull the plug here, and I hope everybody appreciated Seth being here.
It's Growing to Live, I think. I think that's what he means. I don't know.
Yes, Seth, you're correct. So
I think it's Growing to Live. You need to issue a press release just like the band.
Well, I took it from the perspective because we were talking about
we were live, and it makes sense.
Right. So makes a lot of sense. But good night, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me. Appreciate it so much. And we will be back next week with another episode of Podcast Tips with Rob Greenlee at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. So thank you so much for joining me, and come back and visit the StreamYard website. And if you're currently using StreamYard, I appreciate you doing that. But if you wanted to give StreamYard a try, I do have a trial that you can sign up for. Just go to StreamYard.com/RobG and get your free trial and discount to give the platform a try. Create your own live show. So thank you, everybody. And we'll see you next week. Thanks.